You got married because you were supposed to get it right. Your parents blew it up. You watched it happen. You were standing right there when the yelling turned into silence, and the silence turned into boxes by the front door. So you made yourself a promise. You were going to do this differently. You were going to pick better, try harder, stay longer. And a lot of you did exactly that. You stayed married longer than your parents did. You picked someone you actually liked. You built the house, had the kids, split the bills, showed up to every recital and every parent-teacher conference. And somewhere around year 15 or year 20, you looked across the kitchen table at the person you chose on purpose, the person you were never going to leave, and you thought, I don't know who you are anymore, and I'm not sure you ever knew me. My name's Frank, and today we're going to talk about why the generation that swore it would never get divorced is getting divorced, and why the way you're doing it says more about who you are than the wedding ever did. Here's what's interesting. When researchers at Marriage Helper partnered with the Barna Group in 2021 and surveyed over 1,500 married adults across every generation, Gen X came in dead last for marital satisfaction. Only 47% of you said you were very satisfied in your marriage. Boomers scored higher. Millennials scored higher. You, the generation that studied your parents' mistakes like a final exam, reported the lowest satisfaction of anyone. And here's the part that makes it worse. Only 17% of Gen X said they'd even consider getting help. Lowest willingness to seek counseling, lowest satisfaction, highest stubbornness about fixing it alone. That's not strength. That's a pattern. And the pattern didn't start at the altar. It started with a promise you made when you were 12, or 10, or 8. However old you were when you realized your parents' marriage was falling apart and you decided, silently, in whatever room you happened to be sitting in, that you were never going to do this to your own kids. That promise became a rule, and that rule became a cage, because what you were really saying was, I will absorb anything to avoid becoming them. And absorbing is exactly what a lot of you did. A therapist in Philadelphia named Dr. Deborah Lupnitz works with a lot of Gen X patients. She told Time magazine something that hit hard. She said what she sees in her Gen X patients is total exhaustion. They feel guilty for complaining because it's wonderful to have choices their mothers didn't have. But choices don't make life easier. Choices create pressure. That's the trap. You were raised in a time when women were told they could have everything: career, marriage, kids, identity, and men were told they should support that, but nobody gave either side a manual for how it was supposed to work day to day. So what happened? Somebody ended up carrying more, and they carried it quietly, because complaining felt like ingratitude, and asking for help felt like admitting the marriage was broken, and if the marriage was broken, then you were becoming your parents. And that was the one thing you could not be. Now let's talk about what the actual divorce looks like when it happens. Because Gen X doesn't blow things up the way boomers did. You don't throw plates. You don't have screaming matches on the front lawn. You do something much quieter and, honestly, much harder to recover from. You go silent. A divorce mediator who's been doing this work for over 25 years wrote about a pattern they see with Gen X couples that's so consistent it's almost scripted. Here's how it goes. The wife tells the husband something needs to change. She's specific. She's clear. She says it more than once. The husband hears her. He changes for about 3 days, or 3 weeks, or maybe 3 months if she's lucky. Then everything slides back to what it was before. She asks again. Same cycle. 3 days, 3 weeks, 3 months. Back to normal. This goes on for years. Maybe a decade, maybe longer, and then one day she stops asking. And the husband thinks the problem went away. It didn't go away. She just stopped believing it could be fixed. By the time she files, she's done. Not angry, not dramatic. Done. And the husband is blindsided. He calls the mediator in a panic, says he had no idea, says he'll do anything, says he'll go to therapy now. And when the mediator calls the wife to relay the offer, she says the same thing every time. He knows why we're getting divorced. And then she says, that ship has sailed. I am done. What about the 20% or so of Gen X men who file first? Different story, same loneliness. A lot of them report being in marriages with almost no physical intimacy. They've been asking for connection in the way they know how, and has been met with nothing for years. Both sides are starving, just for different things. Here's what makes Gen X divorce different from every generation before it. You're not leaving because you hate each other. You're leaving because you're exhausted by the distance. The marriage didn't explode. It just slowly went numb. A lot of you have been in the comments sharing stories about your childhood, your parents, stuff you never connected until now. That's actually what made me sit down and write a book about it. Psychology of Gen X. It's in the description. So why does this keep happening to a generation that worked so hard to prevent it? Part of it is something Harvard economist Claudia Golden called the grand gender convergence. Starting in the 70s, women gained legal access to contraception, equal education through Title IX, workplace protections, and financial independence. The world told Gen X girls they could be anything, and they believed it. They went to college at the same rates as men. They entered careers their mothers never could have. They expected partnerships, not arrangements. And the men? They got the message too, sort of. Gen X men were more involved fathers than any generation before them. According to Pew Research, today's fathers spend roughly 3 times more time with their kids than dads in the 1960s. That's real progress. But here's where it broke down. The parenting shifted, the housework didn't. Not enough. A study from Boston College's Center for Work and Family found that Gen X dads reported more internal conflict about work and family than previous generations. They wanted to be present fathers. They also had boomer bosses who looked at paternity leave like a punchline. So they were stuck between what they wanted to be at home and what they were allowed to be at work. And their wives were watching them come home, sit on the couch, and not notice that the laundry had been folded, the lunches had been packed, the permission slips had been signed, and dinner was already cold. NYU professor Dr. Kathleen Gerson wrote about this in her book, The Unfinished Revolution. She said Gen X had no well-worn paths to follow. Marriage didn't promise permanence anymore, but there was no clear alternative either. Work and family shifts created an ambiguous mix of new options and new insecurities. Conflict between work and parenting. Conflict between autonomy and commitment. Conflict between time and money. You got egalitarian expectations and zero infrastructure to support them. That's not a recipe for a happy marriage. That's a recipe for 2 people who love each other slowly running out of gas. And here's where it gets really interesting. When the marriage finally ends, Gen X doesn't fall apart the way people expect. You reorganize, quietly, efficiently, like you've been preparing for this your whole life. Because in a way, you have. You've been self-sufficient since you were a kid. You know how to handle things alone. You know how to figure it out without calling anyone. You know how to keep moving when the floor drops out. That independence that got you through childhood, it kicks right back in. You find an apartment. You set up a custody schedule. You divide the retirement accounts. You co-parent with spreadsheets and shared calendars. You don't fight over the kids because you already decided years ago that your kids would never feel what you felt. And that part you actually got right. Gen X is reinventing what divorce looks like. Not the screaming kind, not the Kramer versus Kramer kind, the kind where 2 people sit their kids down, explain it clearly, and then spend the next 10 years coordinating holidays like a logistics operation. Some researchers have noted that Gen X is leading the way toward more conscious breakups, trying to reinvent the family after divorce instead of destroying it. Because you remember what destruction felt like. You carry it in your bones. But here's the part nobody talks about. What happens to your identity after the divorce papers are signed? When you've spent 20 years defining yourself as someone's husband or someone's wife, and that label disappears, what's left? A lot of Gen X finds out the answer is not as much as they expected. Psychologists at Palo Alto University have pointed out that midlife divorce often collides with a broader identity reckoning. You might be losing your parenting identity at the same time as your kids leave the house. You might be questioning your career. You might be realizing that the life you built was assembled from other people's expectations, and now that it's taken apart, you're not sure which pieces were actually yours. That moment, standing in a half-empty apartment, kids with their other parent for the weekend, no meeting to go to, no one to take care of, that's the moment Gen X finally meets itself. And for a lot of people, it's the first honest conversation they've had in years. Some of you come out of it sharper, more focused. You pick up hobbies you dropped in your 20s. You reconnect with friends you haven't talked to since before the kids were born. You realize that being alone isn't the same thing as being lonely, and that being married wasn't the same thing as being known. Some of you start dating again and realize the whole world has changed. You left the dating world when people still met at bars. Now there are apps with algorithms and profiles and the unspoken expectation that you'll decide someone's worth in the time it takes to swipe a thumb. That part is weird. You'll be fine, but it's weird. And some of you sit in that quiet apartment and realize something you didn't expect. You're relieved. Not happy, not celebrating, just relieved. Like you've been holding your breath for 15 years and you finally exhaled. And then the guilt kicks in, because relief feels like betrayal. If you're relieved it's over, does that mean you didn't try hard enough? Does that mean you're the one who failed? Does that mean you did become your parents after all? No, it means you're human. It means you carried something heavy for a very long time, and your arms finally gave out. That's not failure. That's physics. Psychology of Gen X is a short book that traces the things you do today back to the rooms and the people that built those habits into you. If that sounds interesting, links in the description. The marriage satisfaction numbers tell us something important. When 65% of Gen X husbands say they're satisfied, and only 52% of Gen X wives say the same thing, that 13-point gap isn't just a statistic. It's two people living in the same house, experiencing two completely different marriages. He thinks things are fine because his basic needs are met. She's been waving a flag for years that he genuinely cannot see. Both of them are telling the truth. Both of them are wrong about the other. And neither of them knows it until it's too late. That's the Gen X divorce in one sentence. Two good people, both trying, both missing each other by inches, for decades, until inches become miles, and miles become lawyers. But here's what's worth saying, because it doesn't get said enough. The fact that you tried matters. The fact that you stayed longer than you had to matters. The fact that you co-parent better than your parents did matters. The fact that your kids have two homes where they're loved instead of one home where they're caught in the crossfire, that matters more than you think. You didn't repeat the explosion. You just couldn't stop the erosion. And erosion isn't a moral failing. It's what happens when two people who were never taught how to ask for what they need try to build a life on endurance alone. Gen X got dealt a specific hand. You watched your parents' marriages fall apart, and you swore you'd do better. And in a lot of ways, you did. You just didn't know that doing better didn't mean doing everything. It meant doing different things. Talking when it was uncomfortable. Asking for help when it felt like weakness. Admitting you were drowning before you went under. But nobody taught you that part. You were raised to figure it out. So you figured it out alone, even when you were married. And that's the real psychology of Gen X divorce. It's not that you didn't love each other. It's that you loved each other the only way you knew how, from a distance, with your arms full, hoping the other person could see what you were carrying without you having to put it down and show them. You didn't fail at marriage. You just married the same way you grew up, tough, quiet, and hoping somebody would notice without you having to say a word. The next chapter doesn't have to look like that. You already know what silence costs. Now you get to find out what happens when you finally stop carrying it alone. Quick thing before I go. Psychology of Gen X came out of doing this channel and realizing there was a bigger story connecting all of these topics. If you want to take a look, it's linked below. Thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next video.